Now, the goal of this work is to evaluate one of the very popular features that's offered by virtually every online homework system, and that is automated feedback. So what do we mean by feedback, first of all? Well, traditionally, when we think about feedback, what that means is taking the biggest red pen you can possibly find, and you're marking up every student's paper to indicate what they got right or wrong, and also to provide some constructive criticism on how they can improve their work going forward. Now, of course, not all feedback is going to be this detailed. So, for example, feedback can be as simple as just marking a few X's just to indicate what students got right or wrong. This is still feedback, although not quite as detailed. Now, with the development of online homework, much of this written feedback has become automated. Okay? And I want to start by showing some examples of automated feedback by a few of the more popular online systems. So first, we have sapling. When students make a mistake in one of their problems, the system will mark it with an X and also provide some feedback in terms of explaining what the error was and how to correct that error. Next, we have Learning Curve, which is an adaptive quizzing feature within Launchpad. And again, when students make a mistake, the system provides a very brief explanation in terms of what the mistake was. We have Applia. As you can see, Applia provides a very voluminous amount of feedback with all of their problems. What we argue in this presentation is that the best form of feedback is the type of feedback that's very dynamic and interactive. So here we have, this is a few days ago, you have me in my office trying to explain a concept to one of my students who looks a little bit confused. And my hope is that after my student leaves the office, that he'll be just a little bit less confused. Okay? I don't try to put the bar too high. So hopefully that's the case. And it's through the interaction by showing visuals, by showing the actual problem, by talking about it, and that sort of interaction really is what we call the best form of feedback. In an ideal situation, what features would online feedback provide? First of all, it would be automated, because that's the idea of saving us as instructors a lot of time grading, having it automated, but also to have the feedback be somewhat dynamic, okay? To offer feedback that's more than just words, that could be also more simulating of an office hours environment, something that includes both visuals as well as audio. And so that leads to our main sort of question that we're trying to address in this work is, how effective is narrated feedback relative to written feedback or no feedback at all? Okay? There is quite a literature out there, not in economics per se, but especially in other disciplines such as the sciences, that looks at the effectiveness of automated feedback as well as the extent of feedback, whether it's minimal versus detailed or elaborate feedback. And the general conclusion is that it's sort of the obvious one, right? That more feedback is better, but not necessarily the dramatic benefit that one would expect, okay? And one of the reasons for that is because some of these studies have argued that written feedback is effective if you can actually get your students to read it, which, if you're having trouble getting your students to read a textbook, it's not always easy to get students to read paragraph after paragraph of feedback after every question. Sometimes students just want to move on and go on to the next problem and just do it with trial and error. So perhaps a more pertinent strand of literature that we need to address is that of the cognitive science about how the brain works. Because when you receive information purely through one channel, which is words, which is the way that most feedback comes in terms of text, it's only reaching the brain through one channel, the verbal channel. Whereas in order to retain information, the brain likes to receive information from multiple channels. So to receive information from both the verbal channel as well as the visual channel. That really is the basis of what we're arguing about, that feedback should be a little bit more than just written words. So in our study, we received IRB approval from our universities to test our students. Both Jose and I teach very large sections of principles. And the system that we used in our classes is called Flipit. That's the system that Jose and I are co-developers on. And although Flipit is more known for its interactive pre-lectures, it's also the first system in economics to provide narrated video feedback for nearly every question in the test bank. When students complete any sort of quizzes in our classes, they will see the quizzes, multiple choice questions. They will complete them. They will submit their results. And then the system will, like all our systems, tell them which questions they got right or wrong. The difference with this system is that below each question is a small link that provides a brief video. This video is 30 to 60 seconds, not very long, very straightforward, but it's a video that will simulate that office hours environment where someone is explaining the concept to you. So for the purposes of our research study, we do not provide the video feedback to every student. Okay? Even though ideally now we want to do that, but what we want to show is that is video feedback really marginally better than written feedback or no feedback at all? So the way that we do this is we provide every student with the same question pertaining to a specific learning objective. So for example, it might be on price controls. If the student gets the question correct, they will move on to the next learning objective. Okay? However, if the student gets the question incorrect, they will receive what's called a parallel question. This is another question that is on the same learning objective that's different, but sort of tests the same type of knowledge. But before they see that, they will receive some feedback. And this is where we divide the group into 3 groups. Okay? So for example, every student receives the same question. For those who get the question incorrect, the first group gets very minimal feedback. In fact, they are being told that their question is incorrect, what is the correct answer, but that's it. Okay? Even though this is still feedback, it's so minimal that we classify this group as no feedback. The next group receives whether they got the question right or wrong, and then they receive a text explanation, in this case 2 paragraphs, explaining the problem and what they did wrong. So this is essentially the standard that almost every online system offers today. Right? They offer written feedback on every question. Now the third group is what we call the video group. Okay? So this is the group that receives not the text feedback, but instead a short 30-second video explaining the problem. So like a freehand drawing, as if a student was sitting in the office hours, listening to the professor, explaining the concept of price controls, in this case, price ceilings to the student. So this is what we have now. We have students now divided into 3 groups, each receiving different kinds of feedback. So now what we want to do is find out, how did they do? Okay? So let's go on to the slide with the descriptive statistics. What we did was we asked 8 questions to our students. Okay? And what these numbers are showing is the percentage of the questions they got correct as a ratio of the percentage of the correct for the video group divided by one of the other 2 groups. So for example, the higher the number means that the video group performed better on those follow-up questions than the no feedback group or the text feedback group. Now, as you can see, that there's a lot of variation in the results. Okay? So it's not just the idea that feedback is better or video feedback is better. In fact, there are specific questions in which video feedback did the best. As you can see, there's 4 questions in particular that the video feedback seems to have done the best among the 4. Now, there are certain questions in which text feedback or video feedback was not effective at all. In fact, there's one question, E4, that stands for elasticity, the 4th question, elasticity, in which the video feedback actually did worse. Have you ever had that feeling when a student comes to office hours and they actually leave more confused than when they came in? Something that was more obvious, actually they got, trying to explain something that's obvious ends up making it more difficult than what it should be. Okay? So what we're saying is that the use of video feedback is effective in certain situations. It might not be necessary in all types of situations. Okay? So what we want to know is what are the characteristics of these 4 questions? Clearly, this is a more complex question. It has a graph. It requires analyzing a graph. And the next question is also involving a graph. It doesn't show one, but it involves picturing a graph in one's mind. And then the next question on elasticity involves using a formula and actually calculating the result based on elasticity. So as you can see, these are the type of problems that even if students try to read like a textbook and try to understand the concept, they might have difficulty doing so. Okay? So these are the more technical or graphing questions which typically benefit from someone actually sitting down with the student and explaining it and sort of using various examples to convey that knowledge to the student. We also ran a couple of regressions so that we can control for other variables, such as demographic variables as well as innate ability. And what we did was we ran 2 regressions. The first one is performance on the overall assessment. And then we have the tech score. So this is the 4 questions that we designate as more technical or graphical to see if that makes a difference in terms of when we test the variables of video, the effectiveness of video versus text. As predicted, in terms of providing feedback, whether it's text feedback or video feedback, the results are positive. Okay? So it's not to say that all the systems out there are providing something that's not useful. They are providing something that's useful. But in terms of the magnitude, we are finding that the video feedback has a greater marginal benefit relative to text, okay, in terms of written feedback. In fact, as you can see from the difference between Model 1 and Model 2, the written feedback was effective for Model 2. That's the technical questions. Okay? So clearly, when you have a more challenging question that involves calculating formulas or working with graphs, any sort of feedback is better than none. But in terms of the overall model, what we're finding is that the written feedback might not be effective in all situations. All the other variables sort of fall in line. And so to conclude, what can we say about the differences between automated text feedback and automated narrated video feedback? Well, first of all, with text feedback, that's currently the standard. In terms of its effectiveness, it's really effective in certain situations, especially in the more challenging problems. And what we find is that overall, providing text feedback provides a 16% increase in performance over providing no feedback at all. So that's pretty substantial. That's a strong argument for why it is the current standard out there. Now, as far as video feedback, we believe that this is the next standard that's going to be met. And based on what we've seen in other disciplines, like, for example, math, if you look at what some of the publishers are providing in math and physics, they are already providing video feedback for many of their resources. And we believe that in economics is coming next. The challenge, of course, is it's a much higher fixed cost, okay? Because instead of just writing a sentence or 2 or a paragraph, now you have to plan a script and record a video for every single problem and then upload that into the system. So it's going to be a cost to provide, but ultimately, the marginal benefit of that is very substantial. We find a 25% improvement over no feedback. And it all comes down to how students learn today, right? If you have an opportunity to learn about something you've never heard about before, are you more likely to watch something online, to watch a short news program, a short news clip online? Or are you more inclined to read it in a traditional newspaper? Some would read, but our belief is that the majority of, especially college kids today, they really want to just watch it. And so providing that 30-second to 60-second video explanation is a little more attractive. And if we can get them to actually use the feedback, then our research falls in line with the existing research that says that students who actually takes advantage of the feedback will benefit from it. Okay? So thank you very much.